Yeah, just to sit in a balanced and upright posture, closing the eyes or just lowering the gaze, and bringing the attention into the body. Relaxing the jaw, any tension in the face, releasing the shoulders, softening the belly, opening the chest. The practice of mindfulness of the body can be approached through the lens of elements, feeling the body as its weight and density, just the earth element. Feeling its temperature, warm or cool, the fire element. Feeling the fluidity, the liquid in the body, the water element. Of course, that includes the blood, so perhaps our pulse is a combination of air element and water element. And then the breath and any movement is the air element. And there's one other experience that can be quite prominent, which doesn't doesn't clearly fall into one of these categories. It's more like an energetic feeling of energy or the the kind of tingling and really difficult to characterize this. Sensations that actually feel like the body isn't dense at all. It's actually quite light. It's perhaps an experience of the nervous system, which is probably the fire element. but it seems to have an element of air, kind of spaciousness. And the point isn't to sort of categorize the elements, but rather to start to see that there are these different forms of sensation, different ways of feeling and perceiving the body. When we're not paying attention, you tend to just notice the body when it feels very good or feels very bad. Either when we taste some delicious food or we stub our toe. But much of the time we kind of ignore the body and just take it for granted. Awareness of the body is kind of an anchor that holds us to the present moment. We can only experience the body in the present moment. Feeling the body brings home the reality of life. Well, the mind can take us into fantasies and imaginings. We become disconnected from actual experience of life. That has a certain seduction, but it's ultimately unsatisfying, bound to crash. When the Buddha talks about dukkha, about suffering, much of it is about the body. And he says that birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering. And while we can avoid these kinds of suffering for periods of time, inevitably we are brought back to their reality. And this is why being attentive to the body is so important. It helps us to stay in reality. What really determines our comfort in the world or our lack of suffering is our relationship to this reality. Mindfulness gives us a tool for being in the reality without being in conflict with it. The quality of acceptance, of interest. Our practice is meant to build a kind of fearlessness about reality, that we can be with it, that we don't have to run from it, that we don't have to disappear into our thoughts, but that if we just turn to and hold the present moment with care, with the clear attention, with wisdom, that we can be with the challenging elements of reality. Right. Um, well, I'm not sure where that, where that guided meditation kind of came from. You given that this is a kind of a group, we're never actually physically together, and I see so many of you so often. I don't always, obviously today, just give like introductory meditation instruction, which is generally my approach to just be simple and just go ahead and take people through the basics. But sometimes something else shows up, and I got into thinking about. I mean, I'm leading the meditation, and I'm meditating, and then I'm kind of translating what I'm experiencing into words, or how I'm connecting. And so, this idea of kind of taking apart the sensations into different categories is just a way to help us clarify, what we're feeling, right? Because it's like otherwise it's just like this mass of sensations. And when we think about the elements, as I said, is this one sort of model uh, for categorizing different sensations, and that then helps you to kind of focus, and you can go, oh, what's that? And I'm feeling something here. What's that? And it isn't so much, it's not so important to get the right element, like, oh, that's the fire element. No, that's the air element. It's just to it's just to see that there are distinct different sensations going on, that you're not just having one general feeling of being in a body. Um, and when you read some of the Burmese, uh, Vipassana teachings, particularly I remember Mahasi Sayadaw in Jack Kornfield's first book, which was called Living Buddhist Masters. Uh, they start to talk about like tingling and pulsing and throbbing and hot and cold, and it's sort of uh, maybe I'll pull out that book sometime and go through some of that with you, to show how they're thinking about it. And it's very, I mean, it's not like a very readable thing in that book. You have to be really like a little, Vipassana nerdy to to get into it. But when you come to it with kind of the question of, oh, how should I think about, how can I be more mindful of the particular elements of the body? Then you can kind of the different sensations. Then it becomes interesting. Then, right? When it's just read as just a generic, it's not like a Dharma book that's like, oh, be loving kindness and be whatever. It's very dry. Um, but I also, do, as you heard me kind of come to this place of my own questioning, that what what I can only call energy, which is a really pretty vague term uh, for a sensation. Uh, it's really, in my practice at this point anyway, it's kind of the main experience I have of my body, and it it's one of those things that I have looked in different Dharma texts uh, for technical definitions of what that is, and I've never really found it. Um, it is, I mean, or I shouldn't say what it is, but rather how it's understood through this Dharma lens. Uh, if it can be categorized as one of the elements, and as I said, it's just feeling your nervous system, but it's like feeling your nervous system on this kind of very elemental level. Uh, that's just feeling it as kind of energy, and there's a and I call it energy. I say energy because it's uh, there's movement in it, right? It's not static. It doesn't feel like an earth element where it's solid. It feels, but it also feels electrical in some way. So that's which is energy, and so I think that our nervous system is, as I understand it, I know very little about anatomy, but I understand it as essentially an electrical system. There's elect communication happening, right, uh, through nerves. So if it's electrical, it seems to me that that's like, if it's related to earth, air, fire, and water, it seems like it falls into fire. That's why I kind of think of it as fire, because I think of electricity and as being a fire element. Although you can see that it has an air element to it too. All right, then that wasn't even the subject for the morning, but gets us started. So the other thing I will report is that Oren Sofer will be with us on Friday night, or he has agreed to be with us on Friday night. So Oren, I'll put his name in because it's an unusual kind of spelling. I mean, in my limited Irish Catholic upbringing. Oren has a book called, fairly new book, Say What You Mean. And as it sounds like, it's about speech. He has training in nonviolent communication, and then, of course, mindfulness. He's a Spirit Rock teacher, and he and I work together at mindful schools as well. So chi, yes, thank you. And it is chi. That's right. That's a good comment there. The animating life force. Good. I looked over. Good. I wrote something in the chat, so I noticed that you had said something. Good point. Yeah, but chi is as vague as any other term, unfortunately. But anyway, Oren will be here, to talk about something. I didn't tell him what to talk about. I just said the one thing I suggested was that he kind of give us the top line teachings from this book, but we'll see. That'll be fun. So that's Friday evening at 7 p.m. Pacific time. Meanwhile, trying to get through step 5, I kind of am, I'm not feeling, I shouldn't admit it, but I'm not feeling inspired about it, but it's my job, so So noble friends and a noble conversation. We were talking about this the last time when I pulled out the sutta where this phrase comes from, but I thought I would go back to One Breath at a Time, to the section on page 126 called Noble Friends and Noble Conversation. And I described the same thing I talked about on Friday, which was my first encounter with this teaching. So this teaching is, well, I'll read it. I'll read a couple paragraphs, starting from the beginning. Although I'd practiced a lot of meditation before I got sober, I didn't have a broad understanding of Buddhism. I thought of Buddhist practice as the heroic work of the individual, hidden away in a cave or monastery, practicing in silence and isolation. I was many years into sobriety before I began to learn about how connecting with others fit into the Buddhist path. One night, my teacher was talking about a sutta where the Buddha's cousin and attendant Ananda comes to him and says, "Venerable Sir, this is half the holy life. That is, noble friends and noble conversation." When my teacher read this, I thought that the Buddha was going to correct him, Ananda, saying that these things weren't that important. Instead, the Buddha responds, "Not so, Ananda. Noble friends and noble conversation are the whole of the holy life." I was shocked. I'd always considered meditation to be the whole of the holy life. How could friends and conversation be so important? As my teacher talked about this sutta, I looked around and realized I knew only 3 or 4 people in the group, a group I'd been attending for several years, and a large group, I will add. I noticed around this time that my teacher began to use more interactive exercises and integrate questions and dialogue more in his teachings. I'd always thought of my 12-step program as a little bit of a poor stepchild to the real spiritual work of Buddhist meditation. But I realized then that Noble Friends and Noble Conversation exactly describes 12-step programs. That's what they're all about. Of course, the benignly anarchic form of these programs means that many less than noble conversations and friends will appear, but it's nobility that is at the heart of recovery. Sharing and sponsors, inventory and newcomers, going for coffee with the group after a meeting. These are all examples of noble friends and noble conversation. So that's a start. So yeah, I mean, this is just, as I like to do in my writing and generally, uh, kind of given my own experience and try to generalize that. And it's something that I've certainly saw and didn't really think about early in my meditation practice, and really for a long time, as I say, even after I got sober, that I still sort of had this very narrow idea of uh, mm, what Buddhism, what the Dharma, what the path really entailed, and the idea that it was very individual. And I talk about this a lot. You hear me talking about how this is sort of a very Western approach to Buddhism. In Asia, the Buddhism is much more about the community and about the temple or the monastery, as I understand it. But we have this history, and particularly in this country. I think it comes out of European history, but particularly in this country, this sort of uh, idealizing the individual and the heroic effort. And we see how this even, well, not even, but has a huge influence on our politics and society and culture in general. How there isn't a sense of us being a community. I was thinking about how even the name of our country, you know, it's the United States of America. It's not like America, it's this bunch of different things that decided to like be together, but maybe, like we're not necessarily going to work together. Uh, and and so we come to practice and we think of it as being about ourselves as individuals, that all the work has to be done by us as individuals. And that's in fact, and I'll say that's not not true. uh, it, we do have to do the work. And I think I quoted Manindraji the other day saying, uh, the Buddha solved his problem, but you have to solve your problem. So it's not that, and we know, of course, in Buddhism, there isn't sort of a savior for us. It's not that I take refuge and then the Buddha solves all my problems. Uh, but we're not alone, you know, so, I mean, once again, it comes to a question of the middle way, of finding a balance. Uh, I, I think that I don't know what comes up. One of the things that comes up as I talk about this is how we not only feel that we can feel isolated in the spiritual path, but also uh, as like failures, or we're not good at it. There's a lot of sort of, oh, I'm not a good meditator, or that was a bad meditation I had, and this sort of uh, scoring ourselves, giving ourselves a grade in our path. It's one of the things that's nice about recovery when people say, well, if you just didn't drink or use, it's a successful day. You don't have to always be the perfect recovering person. So to come back to what the importance of community, I mean, the fact that you guys are here and that you keep coming back, like, you know, it just maybe says it all. We meditate, and I say some stuff when we're meditating, but we're all meditating, having our own meditation, and we all have to make, no matter what I say during the meditation, you still have to make all the effort yourself. And your mind might wander, or you might be very focused, and it doesn't have anything to do with anybody else here in any direct way. And yet, we need each other, is what it comes down to, right? We need each other. And that's just a core human quality. Humans are not like lions that go off and live alone. There'll be like, it's always so strange in here. There's a mountain lion in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I'm always like, where's that mountain lion's mother and father? How that's how they live, right? They live, well, I guess the males do, because anyway, I don't know enough. Not only do I not know much about anatomy, I don't know anything about lions either. But so, but humans, I mean, we've always hung out together, and that's our power, right? Anyway, getting into like, oh, it has to do with the length of time that it takes for humans to mature. I don't know, a bunch of little different streams are sort of going through my mind right now. But I'll just come back to this basic idea that community is at the center of our spiritual growth. And I mean, uh, you know, you have we have a teacher. You guys presumably come here because you think I have something to give, but it's partly, if it were just one of you, with me, you wouldn't have the same experience. But the bigger point to me is just like, as humans, we do this thing of helping each other and supporting each other. When you That's what, step 12 is kind of saying. When your spiritual development gets to a certain point, the natural thing is to pass it on. And that's, I've had dozens of teachers, and, depended upon them having done this work to pass it on to me. So there's always this, I don't know if it's a tension, but there's a balance between doing our own work and being supported by a community. One of the sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, you gave me so much insight." you know, when you said this, you gave me an insight, or there's something along those lines. And I will correct people uh, to say, I have been known to correct people and say, I didn't give you insight, that you were at a state, your mind and your heart were ready to hear that wisdom. You know? So there's this, again, this balance between the work that you did to create the mind state, heart mind state, to awaken in that moment. And then there's the the little sort of ding, the little bell that I rang, the thing that I said that was just the right timing. So again, it was your work, and yet it was this combined work. Um, so the of course the way this applies to recovery is that's what the program is. In Buddhism, we come together and we're quiet together. At least that's kind of our one of our main rituals. Uh, but the ritual of recovery is to share and to listen. Maybe I'll read a little bit more. When we choose a sponsor, this is essentially what we're looking for in 12 step. So a noble friend. In 12-step parlance, someone who's got what we want. When I got sober, I made a whole new set of friends, sober people, people trying to improve their lives. I also stopped hanging out in bars and with other drug addicts. This is highly recommended. Sometimes I'm funny. Anyway, in 12-step groups, the people who we got loaded with, or who helped enable our behavior, are called, quote, lower companions. These are the opposite of noble people. In parentheses, of course, nobility is a reflection of actions, not a permanent state. People who get sober, go through the transition from lower companions, for someone at least, to noble people. Close parentheses. After meetings, we go out and talk about our lives, our struggles, our joys, our recovery. Noble conversation. Immediately upon connecting with these new friends, my life changed. I had a whole set of companions who would listen to me talk about my difficulties, give me helpful feedback, and support me in my growth. In meetings, which are another place of noble conversation, I would hear how people had dealt with problems I was beginning to face. I would hear inspiring stories of recovery and growth. Hmm. So then I talk about sort of, well, I'll read it. I'll just read it. People who would return to school or get married or have kids or find more satisfying careers or regain their health or rebuild family relationships, and on and on. All of this helped me to realize my own potential and begin to consider the possibilities I had. My limited self-image had never allowed for the idea I could be anything but a musician. Now those ideas began to change. So I think that's a really, really important thing, that when we hear other people's story, we relate to it and we think, oh, that could be me. Right? That's, I mean, before I got sober, one of the first people I knew who was sober uh, was a musician I was working with. He was a songwriter, and he seemed pretty cool, and he was talented, and he seemed pretty together. And so it was like, oh, that's what sober looks like, you know. Um, and like many of us, before that, I didn't have any image really of sober except the kind of vague, church basement, in a stained trench coat, kind of with a cold coffee. And I don't even know if I had that image, but It seems like I did. Um, and so again, like having that noble person, like that you could imagine yourself being, uh, makes transformation possible because you can't, I mean, maybe I'll say this. I don't know if it's true. You can't transform in a way that you can't imagine. That's that may or may not be true, but it sounds good. It helps definitely to have some image of something. It might be possible to transform and you'd be like, wow, how did that happen? Or I didn't know this could be possible. But generally there's sort of an image. I mean, that's sort of what the Buddha as an archetype represents for us, the ultimate transformation. And without that, it's difficult to know what it is that we're even like working towards. It's interesting. Just the Buddha himself, of course, didn't have that, so he kind of turned into something he had. I mean, he had this. That's what's so interesting. I mean, he had this idea that there was this possibility of being free from birth and death. You know, free from suffering. But okay, so that's more than enough. I'm gonna just open it up and see if there's any thoughts or comments or even questions. Well, well, well. Making me do all the work.
Hi, Kevin. It's Angela.
Hello.
Hi. Make sure no one was raising their hand. Yeah, thank you. As you were talking, I was thinking about, I mean, a few things came up. One is just the concept of interbeing or inter-are, and how in Southern African philosophy, there's also this idea of Ubuntu, which is like I am because you are. Just the whole, interconnectedness, and how it was a class a while ago that you mentioned, doing this practice also not just for ourselves but for humanity. And yeah, that helps me. Because I think, yeah, but it's also a balance, but it's easier for me to do things for others than for myself too. So
Right.
to be like, yes, like this isn't just for you. This is like a responsibility that I hold. And then, yeah, just also this, I did the insight retreat. I think it was in July. Yeah. And with Kamala Masters. And she and other teachers, but she said something really beautiful. She's in Maui.
Yeah.
I didn't know of her before this
Yeah.
retreat, but for others who don't know her, so she was talking about aloha and how it like literally means, my breath is giving you breath, or it's like something about really that uh the connection again. So those were just some images that came that I think, yeah, is just really important to remember. And obviously the connections between recovery and how important community is, but just like in general for humanity, it's really important for us to see that even in this situation that we're in right now with the pandemic, like this is what it's all about. And you've brought that up before in previous classes. So I just wanted to say thank you. And those are some of the things that came up for me.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Angela. And you bring up something that it might have occurred to me to mention too. Thank you, though. So, interconnection, that or interbeing, as you say, that Thich Nhat Hanh term, um, which is the much more profound and kind of ultimate level of reality. That separation is an illusion. That we are all interconnected. Our breath is shared. And and the pandemic is also a sign of interconnection too. Literally we breathe each other's breath, and in this case it's you know something about it that harms our bodies, but it's shared. It's shared, and so yeah, putting on a mask is this separation. Maybe that's one of the reasons people rebel against it. They feel separated. You know that they feel cut off, and I guess that is true. I ran into a neighbor at the market yesterday, and I didn't recognize him. I mean, was like rooting around in the fruit, and we kind of almost bumped into each other. And then I looked, he had a name tag on. I was like, "Oh, hi, hi, neighbor," And then I looked at his face, but there's that way in which, yeah, I couldn't see his face. Um, anyway, hmm. Yeah, John, hi.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Kevin. What comes up from one thing that comes up for me is in Western psychology, they used to think of the infant as this object who was imprinted on, but now the understanding is that from the very point of conception, there's a relational quality to the between the infant and the mother, of course, because the mother is bearing. And then as soon as the infant comes into the world, there's this beginning of attachment that is the basis for physical survival and developmental growth. And that early stage, if it's disrupted, trust doesn't form. If it's good enough, that attachment quality and the mirroring, then trust develops. And I think in recovery and in spiritual practice, it's such a basic kind of component of practice is trusting. And the other thing is in neurobiology, they have discovered what are called mirror neurons, which you were referencing in terms of having kind of an ideal or an image of someone that who represents what we're striving towards. And I think they have this understanding that we have mirror neurons, and what's getting reflected back to us can be formative and full of growth.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's really, really nice, John. Thank you. And one of the I mean, the mirror neurons is the thing that sort of sets me thinking, because it's so interesting how we affect each other, and you heard in like communication circles the idea of matching someone's energy. That if someone's like really upset and you come to them with this like super calm demeanor, that they'll tend to get more upset because it's like they're not being matched, and it's like you're refusing to mirror them, kind of like we need to be mirrored in some way. Like when we say "I hear you" or "I feel you," but of course it can work in a destructive way too. When someone gets angry and then we kind of react. And so maybe that reaction is also not just the emotional response, but also the kind of that this sort of realm of communication has been defined, like unless we assertively sort of like very intentionally set ourselves as I'm not going to react to that, we tend to kind of fall into it because that's what's going on. It's like being in a crowd of people cheering for something, and you get excited even though you don't understand cricket, or whatever sport you happen to be watching. I think of the mirror neurons too as like when if you watch a violent sport like our popular American football, and you see someone get hit, that there's this impact on yourself, like it's disturbing. Uh, you know. So I think I don't know. Now I'm just going off because I'm thinking about like drama and plot, and how you identify with characters, and when you're watching a movie, and so it's so interesting. Yeah, it's all part of being connected, isn't it? So interesting how we're strange beings. Hmm. Well, on that note, I
Kevin, I don't know if you have a minute. Cameron had his.
oh yeah, of course I have a minute. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Cam.
Hey, Kevin. I hope that I can speak clearly, just briefly. So I want to say that I appreciate you first. That this is a community for me. I find myself here and rely on the support that I get here from all of you. So thank you. And then I remember you were saying a week ago or so that you felt like you were saying the same thing or giving the same talk, and that it was, repeating yourself. And, I wanted to just say that I just really appreciate hearing you teach, and that those same teachings are what I'm here for. I want to hear you teach the same thing. And being a musician, I know you being a musician, me slightly a musician. And I heard another teacher teach that mentioned that he was saying that a lot of the times, so musicians, they play. I go to concerts because I want to hear the same song that I know in a slightly different variation. I used to go to a lot of concerts, go around and see the same band, 5 nights in a row, and I want to hear the same song improvised, in a totally different new way. So I love that. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to hear those same teachings, and I appreciate that a lot. I appreciate that. Then along with the conversation today, I have a hard time with fellowship. It's not something I'm really good at. I have a hard time sharing in meetings. After I share, I always kind of wish I hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes I'll share and I'll say, I didn't really mean what I said. That happens to me frequently. I'll say something and then afterwards I'm like, no, that's not, I really don't think that. So then I feel bad. But so anyway, what I have done though is, I put in a lot of work for recovery, and I put in a lot of work to recover, and did those things even though they didn't come easy to me. But these days, I don't really rely on that as much as one thing I rely on though is my family of origin. And my family of origin and my immediate family are really my main basis of support, and friends. I don't have a social life, right? So really at all. So it's really, my social life is my family, my immediate family, and my family of origin. So then one thing, how important that is to, and sometimes I feel it's funny when people say, oh, this is my family. This is my true family. I'm like, well, family of origin is a thing. It's a real thing. It means something. And so then I just was wondering if you could respond maybe to one of the criticisms that I've heard of Buddhism in general is that its lack of emphasis on familial solidarity, and Sangha is certainly salient and hugely significant in Buddhist teaching, as you're saying. It's the whole of the holy life, right? But that's not family of origin. And one of the things about Buddhism that I've heard critically is that, you know, the teaching of leaving your family and going off and, you know, being apart, and kind of, you know, that is one of the things that Buddha did, is left his family, left his household.
Right.
And so that's a criticism. I'm wondering if you can respond to that.
You know, it really comes to how I mean, on the really ultimate level, if I don't know if I can get quite to the ultimate level, but as close as I can get there, that you know, that the Buddha is really tough. You know, taking refuge is really hard. He's very demanding, and on the one hand, he says, suffering is born from those who are dear. So, you know, he says that, you know, your attachment to your family will ultimately cause you suffering. On the other hand, he also says, if you carried your parents around on your back for the rest of their lives, it would not be enough to pay them back for everything they've done for you, raising you. And he says that the biggest gift you can give to your family is to teach them the Dharma. And we have to also say that, and he gives very specific teachings about householders and how to live and how to, their responsibilities and taking care of their families and all of that. It's just there's a distinction between the monastic life and the lay life. In the monastic life, there's a absolute commitment to the path. And if you're absolutely committed to a spiritual path, and I think this is true in all religions, that family of origin or any kind of emotional connection has to become secondary to the ultimate goal of the path. And I think that's a hard truth to.
It's really hard.
It is hard. I'm married, you know, I'm attached to my daughter. I'm not there. I was talking about this when I talked about refuge. I'm actually going to give a talk on refuge tonight for Napa Valley Insight at 7:00. So if you're interested, but yeah, it's not that Buddhism like is saying that you shouldn't have a family or that that's bad. It's just saying it's kind of, the Buddha talks to these different levels of commitment to the path, and that there is this ultimate level which involves not having connection in a formal way. But at the same time, Ajahn Amaro, when was one of my dearest teachers, talked a lot about and has written about when his mother died and how important she was for him, and you know, how much he appreciated her and how much he loved her. And, you know, but he also doesn't go around moping at the loss. You know, it's hard to, you know, I mean, he was totally there for his mother and totally appreciative of her, but so it's not like, oh, I'm a monk now, so I don't talk to my family. You know, that's more like cult behavior. You know, monks still have relationships with their families, just they don't live with them. Then again, most adults don't live with their parents anyway, unless it's a pandemic. You know, they have to go home. Okay, I actually have to get on another call in a couple minutes. And thank you, Cameron, for chiming in. It's really good to hear from you, and it's a good question to explore. So be well, stay safe, stay very safe.